purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. No person can deny.
Welcome to Freethought Forum. I am your host, Hugh Henry, and today we're going to talk about belief. Atheists, freethinkers, and skeptics pride themselves as people who don't believe, who have no faith. In this program, we will challenge that as a logical impossibility. 100 million miracles. 100 million miracles are happening every day, and those who say they don't believe are those who cannot hear or see. These are verses from the title song of the Flower Drums song, musical. Someone once said, I don't know who it was that discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. A fish wouldn't notice. We exist and live every day in a sea of assumptions and beliefs, and it's very hard to see them. Things we assume long enough become the truth, without any actual base. You must believe, have faith, in 100 million things just to put your foot on the floor in the morning when you get out of bed. Well, let's take that. Okay, you get up. First, you believe that you're awake and you're not dreaming. Second, you believe that your legs will not fold under you as you put your foot on the floor. That you will not pass out. Some people with blood pressure medicine find out this is something they can't depend on. That your leg will not snap suddenly, as with bone cancer. That you will not feel pain. So you move through the early morning and you make your breakfast. You assume there will be food in the kitchen. Now, for bachelors, especially college bachelors, this is not necessarily a good assumption. And when you proceed to eat your breakfast, that all your teeth will not fall out, and if they do fall out, you have to go back to the beginning because you're dreaming. You haven't woken up yet. There are some valid assumptions. If you have a job and it's a work day, that can catch you sometimes. You have to be at work on time. Outside work, people meeting you always ask, what do you do? If you're retired, what did you do? From repeated question and expectation, you begin to believe that your job is who you are. How do these assumptions and beliefs become truth? George Bernard Shaw said, a person's creed is not what they say, but consists of the assumptions upon which they habitually act. Let me go through that one more time. A person's creed is not what they say, but consists of the assumptions upon which they habitually act. Things that always work, even if for a remarkably short period of time. Things we want to be true. Things we don't want to be true. The recent stock bubble is a wonderful example. The market would rise forever. I can sell my stock anytime and the money would be right there. A novice gambler or stock picker starts to make money. Well, now he's an expert, talented even. Well, he may have just been lucky or the market may have been rising. And when it all starts to turn around and go bad, well, this can't be happening. This can't be true. I'm an expert. I'm talented. The citizens of the town of Dachau, Germany, didn't want to believe, even in the face of evidence, that there was a death camp killing people outside their town. We believe that we'll never die. Young people are better at this. The old person's variant is that, well, there's life after death and we don't really die. When we drive, as we drive home from here, we won't be in an auto accident. They happen to other people. We believe that. And for some of you, if you drive a little drunk, you'll still be okay? Right now, we are acting and believing in the face of reason and logic that if the U.S. invades Iraq, the price of oil will not rocket and inflation will not burst out of its cage. We are all acting, spending, saving or not, as if things will be the same next year as they were this year. That's because we believe them. When the towers fell, the first reaction of all of us, this isn't happening. It's a movie trailer. It's a sick joke. Always, the first reaction to trauma and tragedy is denial. Let's take counting numbers. Mathematics has assumptions, axioms, postulates. These are all really statements of faith. You have to accept, believe in these in order to proceed. They themselves have no possible proof. They themselves cannot be examined, and their test is when we assume them, things work. The object or game in mathematics is to find the smallest set of such assumptions or beliefs that will work. In the late 19th century, a mathematician named Giuseppe Peano did this for numbers. Now, if you need to look this up, the man's name is P-A-E-N-O. These are the Peano axioms. I never promised this was easy. Whatever you know, whether you know it or not, these are 5 things that you need to believe in order to count. You could believe a different set of things, but you'd have to believe a lot more things. With this, you can work to get, by logic and proof, all the numbers, fractions. You can get to arithmetic. With these, you can prove it is safe to proceed to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Without some belief or faith like this, you can't even count. You don't believe me? Well, Benjamin Disraeli had a hatred for definitions from a dictionary inserted in a speech. And I agree with him, but let's proceed. Postulate, a proposition taken for granted as true, especially as a basis for a chain of reasoning. Axiom, a statement generally accepted as true. Assumption, something that is assumed to be true for the sake of an argument. There's no proofs or backing of any of these things. They're taken for granted as true, generally accepted as true, or assumed to be true for an argument. Continuing with the Greeks believed that every number could be represented by a whole number or a fraction of whole numbers. The Greeks invented the Pythagorean Theorem, which you may remember. It applies to right triangles. And they said that if you have a right triangle, if you take the square of this side and the square of that side and sum them together, you have the square of the remaining side. For a triangle with side 1 and side 1, you square them, each one is 1, you add them together, you get 2, which means that this side has to be the square root of 2. Well, someone proved that the square root of 2 could never be a whole number and could never, ever be represented by a fraction. He discovered the first irrational number. This was checked and rechecked, and according to the story, they threw him off a cliff. Then they abandoned numbers for geometry. Numbers were for merchants and bookies. You couldn't depend on them. So you say, well, wait a minute. something is true because it works again and again and again, works forever? Well, going back to Euclid. Euclid's fifth postulate is that parallel lines do not meet. This is a postulate or assumption. But for reasons known only to mathematicians who get into this, they just didn't like this thing. For one thing, they thought they could make it go away because they thought they could take the other assumptions and prove it. And there are other things they didn't like about it. So, to prove it, they decided, why don't we make a whole geometry where parallel lines meet, out there somewhere. And then we'll let this geometry go forward, and either it will contradict itself, in which case we'll know it's bogus and we were right in the first place, or it will contradict the reality we see around us. This was the first non-Euclidean geometry. So they did just that. They took everything else Euclid gave them, flipped the one that they were trying to mess with, and it was always consistent, and it was always consistent with reality. So then they tried a couple of other things. They said, how about we assume they meet twice, once up there, once back there, and then let's make one where they meet an infinite number of times. Maybe this will tell us something. Nope. All four work. All four work in the real world. It turns out some of Einstein's material requires one of these non-Euclidean geometries. That was 1829, and I have a speech that I don't have time for called The Day That Truth Died, the year that non-Euclidean geometry was invented. Because if you had four things that were simultaneously always worked, always were true, and they contradicted each other, how do you know what's going on? I mean, you've destroyed the truth of mathematics here. At the same time that piano was working in the late 19th century, some mathematicians decided that, you know, there are parts of mathematics where these assumptions and things are close to them, where things are soft, where the foundations aren't good, where we know darn well there's been some termites, just places that are bad. So they decided that they were going to rebuild mathematics from the bedrock, piece by piece. And a large group of them got together. They called themselves Bourbaki, and they held meetings, and they did work for a couple of decades. And then early in the 20th century, a mathematician by the name of Gödel came along and proved a theorem that said that within a closed system like mathematics, there would be things that would be flat true that you could never prove. For a while we thought Fermat's last theorem was going to be one of those, but they proved that a couple of years ago. Well, this sort of torpedoed Bourbaki. They closed shop and gave up. And it became apparent that mathematics was always going to have some very soft places in it, like non-Euclidean geometry. How about David Hume? Born in the 18th century, died in the year of our independence. He was a radical skeptic as a philosopher, nasty old Scotsman. Loved sticking the hat pin in things. He said, cause and effect. How do you know they're related? How do you know there is such a thing as cause and effect? They're just the conjunction of two impressions. You don't have any cause and effect. How do you know the sun will rise tomorrow? Well, under some circumstances, it doesn't. For example, the communities well downwind from Mount St. Helens found that the sun did not rise that morning because all they could see was darkness and ash. And we know that on those rare occasions when a sun swallows the dragon in the middle, or when a dragon swallows the sun in the middle of the day, if you get over here and beat like the devil on the drums, you'll scare him off. It works every single time. There's something that always works. We've been taught to trust logic, reason, and science. And in fact, many atheists and materialists and humanists carry this as a mantra. Logic, reason, and science. Logic, reason, and science. So let's take a look at these. Our reason and logic come from the Greek philosophers. And the Greek philosophers had as many different opinions as economists today. There's an example of the philosopher Democritus, who came up with the idea that matter was formed of infinitesimally small atoms, he called them, that you couldn't see, and they were indestructible. And he's credited with the atomic theory of matter, but it was just a bean hitting the right can. You had 50,000 other theories. The main line of philosophy that's accepted is Socrates to Plato to Aristotle. Now, these guys had certain things to say about the real world, the natural world, and the universe, based on reason and logic. And science has since disproved every single one of the things they said. Aristotle was 100% wrong using reason and logic, but not science. This implies two things. What about the rest of the writings of Aristotle and Plato that deal with society, the mind, and ethics? If what we could test in reality was 100% wrong, what does this say about what we should trust about the parts we can't test? The second question is, what about the method used? They used reason and logic alone, applied by an insightful, reasonable man, without the benefit of science. And in the real world, they were 100% wrong. Doesn't this say something about the method itself? Well, what about science? James Burke wrote a wonderful book called The Day the Universe Changed. It's all the past days when our fundamental scientific understanding of the world changed. When what was accepted as theory or even fact was overturned. The king is dead, long live the king. When we're taught science, we're only taught the parts that were turned out to be correct. We're never taught about the blind alleys and things that didn't turn out right. Science is supposed to change like this. It is the duty of every scientist to look out for evidence that challenges the accepted theory. And for some scientists, it's a major project or even a career. Every science, fact, or theory is tentative and always changeable, or should be. Science can never be the truth. This, by the way, is Freethought Forum. I am Hugh Henry, and we are discussing belief. Now, you can always wander over to logical positivism. This is a branch of philosophy. And this says that truth is what scientists study, and the only truth is what science finds. Philosophically, all else is tilting at windmills, striving against the wind, and pointless. The modern skeptic, such as a member of the Center for Scientific Investigation of the Claims of Paranormal, commonly known as PsyCop, whose magazine is Skeptical Inquirer, the modern skeptic accepts the unknowns accepted by science. For example, the atmospheres of distant planets, we don't know. The functions of many genes, peptides, and proteins, we don't know. That's all right. But he does not accept the unknowns that are not accepted by science. For example, UFOs and ghosts. These, he claims, can always be explained right now by existing science as hoaxes, delusions, poor observations, or a quick, untested scientific explanation that significantly ignores the facts to make it fit. These people are true believers. It is a belief called scientism, a religious belief in the omniscience of current science. So we're back, you put your foot on the floor in the morning. How do you know you're not still dreaming? Descartes tried to figure out how he could put a basis underneath his knowledge, and he started making assumptions just for argument. He says, well, assume I'm dreaming all the time. Or assume that I'm constantly being deceived by a demon somewhere. And he finally backed himself into a corner and he says, look, he says, I think, therefore at least I am. But when he tried to rebuild back the universe, his explanation was that a benevolent God would not allow him to be so deceived. So on that basis, he proceeded to rebuild all that he knew, depending on that benevolent God. Philosophers didn't like that one. They've been trying for centuries to try and get further than I think, therefore I am, to get around the benevolent God requirement. They haven't yet. They've mostly given up. Then there's the Chinese philosopher who dreamt he was a butterfly, and when he woke up, he wondered, am I a Chinese philosopher who just dreamt he was a butterfly, or am I really a butterfly who dreams he's a Chinese philosopher? Well, the answer to that is just trash it, Trash the speculation in philosophy and go with it. It makes no difference whether you're a philosopher or a butterfly. Just play it out. You don't believe me about what's belief. Now, here goes those dictionary definitions that I hate so much. Believe, to have religious convictions, to have a firm conviction about something, to accept as true. Faith, belief and trust in God, complete trust, a system of religious beliefs. Well, as an atheist, I think there's a bit of bias here. But for example, some people Americans have a belief in individual freedom that takes on almost religious connotation. What about the truth? Where do we find it? There's an old belief in Appalachia that there was only one man who was ever exactly 6 feet tall. Only one. And that man was Jesus Christ. Now, there is only one way for a man to be exactly 6 feet tall. And that is if you never measure his height. And better, if you never meet him. It can be true only by faith and faith alone. Let's go back over that. Because, if you take my height, you can't get an exact measurement, and bodies moving around, temperatures and so forth. You can't exactly get 6 feet. So you can't do it. There's only one way you can do it, and that's by faith and faith alone. Absolute truth you can only get by faith and belief. You must never accept a challenge. You must never seek scientific evidence. You must never seek any evidence, because that could lead to doubt. You can never put under science. Real science changes and challenges, always accepts new data, new evidence. Science can never be the truth. You can accept as truth atheism, Christianity, Buddhism, communism, materialism, so long as you believe. To get the truth absolute, your position must be that of St. Augustine, who said, I believe, therefore I know. What about my beliefs? Well, I've got some. I believe that time spent in a bull session or talking on this program does not count against my life. I believe that. I believe that the Egyptians made a mistake 4,000 years ago. The Egyptians tried to domesticate everything from antelopes to zebras, things with 2 legs, 4 legs, and no legs. And they made one mistake, a little tree cat. And the tree cat decided that this domestication thing was a pretty good idea, but the roles needed to be reversed. Ever since then, we have been the domesticated animals of cats. I believe that. And when you go to a museum and you see that tree of life thing they sometimes have, with bacteria on the bottom and dinosaurs in the middle and humans way the heck up on top, right on top there should be a cat. Whatever space a cat chooses to occupy was made for them, and who's ever there is there to serve. I will accept no challenges, no evidence, and no scientific investigation of this. Along with these unsupported beliefs, well, except my belief about cats, I believe there is no God, no creator, and no heavenly ruler. Conclusion. We live in an uncertain world, much as some of us would like to make it certain. In fact, a good deal of the historic journey of man has been a search for certainties. There is even a religion that has no faith in any of the world as we see or live in. Buddhism calls all of it an illusion. And a Buddhist spends his whole life trying to get his mind wrapped around that idea so that he can really see that that's what's going on, that everything is an illusion. We can't escape belief and faith. There are 100 million things each day that require it. We just don't pay attention or think about them. Charles Fort, about whom I will give you more at a later talk, said, "I conceive of nothing in religion, science, or philosophy that is more than the proper thing to wear for a while." In other words, religious truths, scientific truths, philosophical truths are nothing more than fashion. H.L. Mencken said, "We are here. It is now. Further than that, all human knowledge is moonshine." That's the kind of thing Mencken would say. And I try very hard in my life to think the same way that Charles Fort thought. It's not easy, but I try. So I suppose, as some people have accused me of being, I am the ultimate skeptic, and I'm very proud of that. Although, even I have to believe in some things. This is Hugh Henry for Freethought Forum, thanking you very much for watching our program, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To duke or dictator, no person can deny